The HYBE conference room carried the quiet tension of a company used to controlling every outcome. The glass table stretched long, polished to reflect the ceiling lights like a stage, even though no cameras were supposed to be rolling tonight. Yet it still felt like a moment that would someday be replayed in the minds of millions. The top executives sat in their expensive silence, expecting presentations, projections, renewal strategies, the usual corporate rhythm. Instead, they got Taehyung. He stood slowly from his seat, not because he wanted attention, but because he had run out of ways to avoid it. His dark blazer hung slightly loose on a frame that had visibly thinned in recent months, a detail even the most oblivious shareholder could no longer ignore. When he spoke, the temperature of the room seemed to drop without the air conditioner needing to work harder. "I have an announcement," he said, voice calm, measured, rehearsed only by pain, not by script. The executives perked slightly, assuming a solo album date, a brand partnership, something they could monetize by morning. What came next was nothing they could package. "I'm stepping back from BTS," Taehyung said, each word placed like stone. No stutter, no shake, just impact. A stainless steel water bottle slipped from a staff director's hand and crashed to the floor, clanging like an alarm bell that had been waiting for the right moment. Namjoon, seated near the middle, snapped his head up, eyes widening behind his thin silver-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone who had spent his whole life preparing for every possible crisis except this one. Jungkook froze mid-scroll on his phone, thumb still pressed to the screen, breath suspended like the rest of his body had been paused by some invisible hand. Yoongi, arms folded, gaze lowered until now, finally looked up, but his expression remained unreadable, the kind of stillness that didn't mean calm, it meant processing an emotional aftershock that hadn't fully detonated yet. Taehyung continued standing, his fingers locked together in front of him, nails pressing lightly into his skin to keep himself from drifting into a reaction he didn't want them to see. He had delivered the sentence like a man prepared for consequence, not comfort. One of the executives cleared his throat instinctively, but no sound came. The room was elite, powerful, used to bending narratives, but not used to idols bending them. Bang PD, who had been leaning against the wall since the meeting began, finally walked toward his seat and sat down slowly. The leather chair exhaled under him, a hiss of resignation more than support. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but Taehyung had already taken the air from the room. "Wait," Jin finally said, his voice slicing into the heavy quiet. He had always been the one who could break tension with humor, logic, or both. Tonight, logic was the only weapon left. "What do you mean you're stepping back?" "The group," Taehyung said, jaw tightening slightly now. "The tour, the cycle, the contracts, the expectation that I am okay because I smile well." Hosok shifted in his chair, fabric whispering against leather. His eyes glistened under lights that suddenly felt too bright. "You didn't talk to us first," Hosok said softly, but his softness carried accusation. "We're your brothers. You didn't think we deserved to know before the board did." Taehyung finally blinked, a slow inhale, controlled, steady. "I tried," he said quietly, "for months, but every time I opened my mouth, all I saw was the damage it would do to the people who love me for the version of me that performs." That line hit Jungkook harder than Taehyung expected. His chair scraped back as he stood, needing movement to prove he was still real. "You're serious?" Jungkook asked, not yelling, not whispering, but in that mid-register of disbelief that feels like a man begging reality to confirm itself. "Right before contract renewal, right before the next cycle." "Especially now," Taehyung replied, "because I refuse to sign another chapter of a life I don't recognize." Bang PD leaned forward, elbows pressing into the table, the HYBE logo centered between his forearms like it was watching too. "Is this about the pressure, the solo schedules, or something deeper, V?" Taehyung looked at the logo, then back at the man who built the empire around it. His lips twitched into something like a sad smile. "It's about breathing," Taehyung said, "feeling like I exist when the cameras don't." The executives had heard enough. They thought it was about them. It was. It was about the boy who had disappeared somewhere inside the man standing in front of them. The door clicked open slowly, revealing a junior staff member holding a tray with a single teacup. Her hands trembled as she stepped into a room electrified by a storm she didn't have clearance to know about. "Sorry," she stammered. "Delivery for Mr. Kim. You asked for tea, sir." Taehyung nodded once. "Yes, thank you." He took the cup, but his hands shook slightly now as he lowered himself back into his seat, not from fear, but from the realization that honesty had weight and he had finally lifted it. The tea steamed softly in his hands, a small warmth in a room that had permanently changed temperature. Namjoon stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Seoul skyline, a city poising unaware of the seismic event inside a glass tower high above it. "This isn't just a personal decision," Namjoon said quietly. "It's a ripple. Fans, futures, contracts, identity, all of it shifts now." Taehyung nodded. "I'm not asking for permission, I'm asking for understanding." Taehyung knew the fallout would not wait. The members didn't leave the room that night with resolution. They left carrying new gravity in their steps. The confrontation that followed in the HYBE hallways felt inevitable, like the building itself had memorized the emotional pattern of idols breaking before corporations did. Jungkook was the first to confront him again, but not where executives could spectate. It happened in one of the smaller vocal rooms, a space designed for harmonies, not emotional fractures. The door shut behind Jungkook with a firmness that suggested containment, not escape. He stepped forward slowly, eyes red from a night that had stolen more sleep than schedules ever had. "You blindsided us, T," Jungkook said, voice low, gravelly, carrying that American edge that slips in when emotions lose their filter. "You always talked about honesty, loyalty, weathering storms. Then you dropped that sentence like we were shareholders, not family." Taehyung didn't react immediately. He had replayed this moment in his head, scripted only by anxiety. When he spoke, it was quiet but edged. "I didn't drop it at you," he replied. "I dropped it for me. You were just close enough to feel the shockwave." Jungkook shook his head, packing once, twice, needing motion to bleed excess emotion. "You keep saying this is about you breathing, you finding yourself, but what you don't say out loud is that you were suffocating next to us. Next to me." Taehyung blinked. "That's not what I meant." "But it's what it sounded like," Jungkook snapped, eyes flashing with something wounded, familiar, unresolved. "You think we don't know you're exhausted. We saw the distance in rehearsals, the silence between takes, the way you stare at mirrors like they owe you answers. But leaving without talking, that's not self-discovery, that's self-erasure." Taehyung exhaled sharply and leaned back in his chair, letting the leather take the tension from his spine. "And what would I have said?" he asked, voice rising now, unplanned. "That I've been unraveling for years, that the cameras turned into cages, that every contract cycle felt like a coffin I politely signed myself into. You all would have looked at me like I was glass." "Because you are fragile right now," Jungkook barked. "Not weak, fragile, there's a difference." "And I didn't want to be handled like a PR emergency," Taehyung shouted back. "I wanted to be heard, not managed." The air between them crackled, tension sharper than any music theory. The piano in the corner sat silent, useless, ornamental, witnessing. Jungkook inhaled slowly now, hands trembling at his sides. "You think I wouldn't have listened?" "You think I believed you could," Taehyung countered. "When you're the one who always jumps into every storm first. You're a hurricane with arms, Jungkook. You don't sit. You don't pause. You fix, you lift, you carry. And I didn't want to be another weight you pretend isn't heavy." That hit Jungkook harder than Taehyung expected. His jaw ticked. His hands curled once, twice, like fists remembering choreography they were never taught. "You didn't want to be a burden," Jungkook repeated quietly. "That's the saddest headline you've ever written yourself into." Silence swallowed them for a long moment, thick, pressurized. Then the door opened again. It was Yoongi. He didn't look surprised to see the emotional battlefield. He looked resigned, like a man who had been standing in fallout zones long before grenades had names. He walked in holding a cold bottle of water, condensation dripping like punctuation for a conversation no one wanted to finish. "You both look like hell," Yoongi said flatly. "No accusation, no comfort, just observation. If you're going to tear each other apart, at least do it where the press can't quote it." Jungkook didn't answer, Taehyung didn't either. Yoongi sat on the bench nearby, legs spread slightly, posture casual, eyes anything but. "You know what hurts most," Yoongi continued. "Not the announcement, not the renewal timing. It's the assumption that we love you only when you're useful." Taehyung's chest tightened. "That's not what I assumed." "No," Yoongi said, eyes narrowing slightly. "That's what you feared. There's a difference." Taehyung stood, packing once, mirroring Jungkook's earlier restlessness unintentionally. "Maybe fear was the only honest thing I had left that wasn't branded," he said. "Everything else had a schedule attached to it." Yoongi nodded once. "Then maybe you need silence, but silence isn't the same as solitude, V." Taehyung looked at him. "Explain that." Yoongi didn't answer immediately. He just stood and walked toward the punching bag in the adjacent gym, the one Jungkook had almost bled into last night. The bag swayed faintly from momentum it had memorized. Yoongi tapped it once with his knuckles. "Silence is where you hear yourself. Solitude is where you convince yourself no one wants to listen." The words landed. Taehyung swallowed hard. "And which one am I doing?" he asked quietly. "You tell me, Hurricane," Yoongi said, glancing at Jungkook briefly. Jungkook exhaled through his nose, half a laugh, humorless, pained, human. Taehyung leaned his back against the mirror now, sliding down until he sat on the floor, legs bent, posture small, honest, unguarded. "Maybe I'm scared of needing anyone," he admitted, "because needing people makes loss inevitable." Yoongi nodded. Jungkook finally sat down too, arms resting on his knees, mirroring a posture of surrender they never practiced together. The silence now felt like a verdict they all signed willingly. "I'm not asking you to stay okay," Yoongi said. "I'm asking you to stay present. Even if present means confused, tired, angry, unraveling. We can survive chaos. We can't survive people we love disappearing mid-sentence." Taehyung's jaw tightened. "You all make it sound poetic. It felt messy from my chair." "It is messy," Jungkook finally said, voice low now. "But messy isn't fatal, unspoken is." The room exhaled collectively, three men breathing in a small radius that felt like temporary truce, not treaty. Taehyung looked at his hands. "Then maybe we start with words, not renewals," he said quietly. Yoongi stood again. "Good, because chaos sells. Silence kills retention." Taehyung almost laughed, almost cried, almost both. The days after Taehyung's announcement moved like shockwaves through HYBE's glass corridors. The company could control lighting, camera angles, press cycles, and quarterly projections, but it could never control what an idol carried in his voice when the script burned away. And Taehyung had burned the script. The members tried to continue rehearsals because the world kept spinning even when their axis shifted. The practice room mirrors stretched wide, reflecting not just bodies but the ghosts of old synchronization, when movements flowed without hesitation, when glances didn't sting, when silence between songs meant comfort, not crisis. But now, silence had become territory. Jimin was quietest, not weak, just withdrawn, like someone slowly pulling their heart back into their ribcage to keep it from being drafted into another battle. Hoseok tried to smile through warm-ups, but his eyes betrayed him. Jin cracked jokes at first, but even jokes have expiration dates when emotional fallout fills the room faster than oxygen. Namjoon worked non-stop, negotiating clauses, media shields, temporary hiatus terms, fan cafe containment strategies. Because someone had to think when everyone else felt too loudly to calculate. Jungkook avoided mirrors for days, not because he feared reflection, but because every reflection contained Taehyung's words, reverberating like a sentence that had not finished detonating. Yoongi kept training, hitting punching bags in quiet punishment cycles, because anger needs movement when it has no safe mouth to exit from. Then there was Taehyung, sitting alone in the very same practice room where the members used to melt into one rhythm. Now the rhythm felt foreign. He stared at the floor, palms pressed flat behind him, posture small, honest, unedited. His hoodie was off, his hair unstyled, his face bare of performance armor. If a camera had been rolling, fans would have mistaken the vulnerability for an aesthetic choice. It wasn't aesthetic. It was exhaustion finally choosing honesty. Jungkook entered first. He always did. Not hurricane loud this time, just hurricane present. He dropped his gym gloves onto the bench and sat without asking for permission to occupy space. Permission is for executives. Presence is for brothers. "You look worse," Jungkook said quietly. "You sound tired," Taehyung replied. "I am tired. Of me." "No," Jungkook said, leaning back, eyes closed briefly. "Of losing people without closure." Taehyung inhaled sharply and looked at the mirrors again. "You think closure exists in rooms like this?" "It exists in people like you," Jungkook replied. A long silence passed, but it was no longer frozen. It was simmering, active, transitional. Jungkook stood again, packing once, twice, then stopping in front of Taehyung. "Say it properly, T. Not the press version, not the shareholder version. The human version, that you're scared, that you're tired, that you don't want us right now." Taehyung blinked slowly. "I don't want a version of me that only exists because I perform it. That's different." "But you didn't tell me," Jungkook countered, voice cracking faintly. "You told a room full of suits first." "Because I knew you'd beg me to stay," Taehyung replied honestly. "And is that so bad?" Jungkook asked. "It is if staying means I disappear inside expectations again," Taehyung whispered. That was when Jimin entered. Soft footsteps, heavy impact. He held a folded envelope in his hand, not his own letter this time, but Taehyung's unsigned future. Namjoon had negotiated time. Jimin negotiated truth. "They're planning a statement," Jimin said quietly. "I know," Taehyung replied. Jimin sat beside him on the floor, leaning back into the mirror like it could finally hold someone without needing a photo shoot. "You're not the villain for wanting silence," Jimin said. "You're the villain for assuming we only love you when you're loud." Taehyung swallowed hard. "That's not what I assumed." "That's what you feared," Jimin corrected softly. Jungkook exhaled sharply. "Damn, you both talk like poets when I feel like hell." "Feeling like hell is human," Jimin replied. "Packaging hell into statements is HYBE's job." Taehyung looked at both of them now. Two boys he had grown with inside a machine that demanded adulthood without offering quiet. He rubbed his palms over his face once, grounding, unedited. "Maybe fear was the only thing I owned that wasn't scheduled," he admitted quietly. "And now," Jungkook asked. "And now I don't know who I am without the weight of being okay for everyone else," Taehyung confessed. The practice room mirrors reflected the moment, unfiltered. A room full of unrenewed futures, unspoken emotions, unmarketable fractures. But fractures heal better when they breathe openly. "You want silence?" Jungkook asked again. For a while, Taehyung nodded. "Then we give it," Jungkook said. "And we stay present," Jimin added. "And we stop pretending this industry didn't almost eat us whole," Jungkook muttered. "And we negotiate better contracts for our souls, not just our schedules," Jimin smiled faintly. Taehyung almost laughed, almost broke, almost both, because emotion has no single register when it finally stops performing. "We start with words, not renewal pens," Taehyung said quietly. "And tomorrow?" Jimin asked. "Tomorrow we keep trying," Taehyung replied. "And the media hell?" "Let it burn," Jungkook said softly, glancing at the mirror. Burning rooms create better headlines anyway. And for the first time in weeks, Taehyung didn't fear the headline. He feared losing himself to another silent draft cursor blinking unsent. The press didn't wait until the wounds settled. It never did. The narrative leak was subtle at first, unnamed insiders whispering to media outlets, speculative think pieces disguised as industry analysis, concerned sources, suddenly materializing with stories no one could verify but everyone wanted to amplify. HYBE prepared statements like architects prepare evacuation routes, structured, sterile, efficient, emotionless. The public prepared reactions like armies preparing flares, loud, bright, explosive, trending. The fans were first to react, of course. Taehyung's words from that night, the fictional grenade that never existed in official minutes, spread through online communities like mythic wildfire. They weren't reading corporate logic. They were reading Taehyung, and Taehyung was always a man people believed, even when the story wasn't real. Comment sections erupted with long threads analyzing posture, eye contact, chair scrapes, bottled metal acoustics, emotional micro-tremors in muscle movement during contract seasons. None of it was factual, all of it was convincing. Fan edits pulled old footage from award shows, concert backstage clips, practice room glances, and recontextualized them like forensic evidence. The internet was playing detective, jury, and executioner in one browser tab. HYBE executives held emergency media meetings to contain the containment that had never worked to begin with. Crisis PR teams who had once negotiated comeback campaigns now negotiated public psychology. Their whiteboards were full of arrows, scenario trees, headline simulations, trend forecasting, CTR modeling, RPM projections, sponsor risk mitigation branches. But every branch eventually circled back to one truth. Taehyung had changed the emotional climate, not the contractual one. And emotional climate is harder to litigate than legal clauses. Namjoon entered the HYBE PR strategy room holding a thick folder, the same posture he had worn when negotiating Taehyung's temporary leave clause in the fictional contract draft. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the tired disbelief of a man who has had to translate emotion into policy for too many people who were never taught to speak it fluently. "You can't fix chaos in the media by releasing silence," Namjoon said, tapping the folder lightly against the desk. "Silence was the point," a PR director countered. "No," Namjoon replied. "Silence was his point. The media took absence." The room fell into its own silence now, corporate, professional, practiced. Jimin appeared behind Namjoon, leaning casually against the doorway like he always had when conversations weren't supposed to be happening, but needed to anyway. "You both look like you're trying to solve human math with corporate grammar," he said quietly. "We are," Namjoon sighed. "And failing," Jimin added with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Because people don't trend for grammar, they trend for heartbeat." Jungkook was packing again, but this time in the gym, punching bags swaying from the punishment cycle of emotional overflow. His knuckles were wrapped, but his face was unfiltered, unstyled, unsponsored, unrenewed. Sweat dripped onto the mat like punctuation he didn't get to write with words. His manager passed by once, twice, 3 times, choosing wisely to say nothing because you don't interrupt a man having a monologue with physics. Taehyung entered the gym quietly, not to perform, not to argue, not to kneel, not to ask. Just to stand where Jungkook could no longer pretend he didn't matter. Jungkook didn't turn at first. "If you're here to apologize in poetry again, don't." "I'm not," Taehyung said. "I'm here because poetry was never the language, truth is." Jungkook finally turned. His face was tired, wounded, human, unsimulated. "Then say it properly, V." Taehyung exhaled once, long enough to stretch across public perception cycles, across unsent drafts, across renewal season identity crises, across fandom mythology arcs. "I wasn't suffocating because of you," he said quietly. "I was suffocating because I forgot where I ended when you began, and the world deserves honesty more than it deserves shockwave aesthetics. Jungkook swallowed hard. That's still scary. I know, Taehyung nodded, but I'd rather be scared than silent in other people's contracts again. Jimin sat on the bench now, water bottle in hand, condensation dripping quietly like emotional footnotes for scenes no one asked to read but everyone needed to see. Scared still trends better than silence, he said quietly. Namjoon sighed from the corner. Everything trends better than silence. Taehyung nodded slowly. Then let them trend. I refuse to be rewritten by people who don't know the weight of a practice room mirror at 11:47 p.m. Jungkook exhaled through his nose again, half laugh, half fracture, fully human. Fine, then we do it your way. And your way is? Taehyung looked at the punching bag swaying faintly between them, then back at the brothers who were no longer shareholders in a story, but co-survivors in it. My way is messy honesty, he said. Not corporate minutes, not media mythology, just the human truth that none of us were taught to speak but all of us survived learning. And tomorrow, Taehyung said quietly, we stop performing okay. The gym fell silent, not corporate, not media-friendly, just final. When the media flames burned at their brightest, HYBE finally realized that controlling the story meant losing it. The more they polished, the more the narrative slipped through their hands like dust between fingers. So they did the only thing a corporation almost never chooses first. They paused, not out of emotion but out of strategic surrender. Because a narrative you can't own is a narrative you must let breathe, or it will suffocate you in public instead. BTS wasn't just a group anymore. In this fictional retelling, they had become a cultural phenomenon whose emotional gravity could bend news cycles, stockholder expectations, and fan devotion arcs without lifting a finger. And Taehyung's sudden announcement, the fictional bomb that detonated nothing official but everything emotional, had turned the company into a stage no one rehearsed for. The members were called into a final alignment meeting, one that wasn't scheduled on the public calendar. The chairs were different from the night of the announcement, softer, quieter, less corporate, but the air carried the same tension. Not the dangerous kind anymore. The honest kind. The kind that makes you sit straighter, not because you fear consequence, but because you respect the moment too much to perform through it. Taehyung was the last to sit but the first to speak. Not loudly, just unmistakably. I saw the headlines, he said in the retelling, voice steady but textured with the weight of someone who had watched his own fictional narrative become more believable than most verified statements. They called it shocking, irresponsible, unexpected, explosive, and career-altering. None of them used the word human. That's how I know the story outran the truth. A HYBE executive, fictional, unnamed, symbolically present, cleared his throat. Human doesn't trend, Taehyung. It does when the industry forgets it, Taehyung countered calmly. Shock trends, drama monetizes, but human retains. Retention drives RPM, not just virality spikes. Namjoon leaned forward slightly. You're turning media fallout into audience metrics now. No, Taehyung shook his head. I'm turning truth into something survivable. Metrics just prove why honesty lasts longer than noise. Jungkook smirked faintly, arms crossed. So you're saying the internet did our job for us? They did the emotional part, Taehyung nodded. We do the real part now. Jimin twisted his bottle cap slowly, thoughtful. And the real part is? Taehyung looked around the table, not like a man preparing a statement, but like someone choosing the right opening line to a story he wanted to live inside instead of narrate from the outside. The real part is simple. I said something big without telling the people who'd feel it first. That wasn't honesty. That was fear talking with a megaphone. This time I speak smaller, clearer, and properly. The fictional room held its breath, leaning in not because of suspense, but because clarity demands attention more than shock ever does. I'm not leaving you, Taehyung said quietly. I'm leaving the idea that I must lose myself to keep peace. I don't want silence from you. I want silence with you until we remember how to speak without disappearing into roles again. Hoseok exhaled in relief. Jin nodded once, approving. Yoongi's shoulders softened by a millimeter, small but seismic. Namjoon closed the folder in front of him, no longer needing to negotiate someone's humanity in legal language. Jimin smiled faintly, realer this time. And Jungkook, for the first time since the fictional explosion. Stop packing. Damn, Jungkook said softly. You could have led with that. I know, Taehyung replied honestly. But leading is a skill the industry gives some people early and some people late. I learned it late. Jimin chuckled quietly. Late still charts better than never. Namjoon nodded. And you're charting now. Taehyung almost smiled, the kind of smile that exists before the camera even thinks about turning on. If this story charts, he said quietly, let it be because it retains hearts, not steals them. Another silence followed, but this silence was different from Part 1's shockwave void. This silence was shared territory, not empty land. A pause between sentences, not a period at the end of identity. Jungkook stood, grabbed his gloves, and slung them over his shoulder. Fine, he said. Messy honesty tomorrow, no performing okay. No performing okay, Taehyung echoed. Jimin stood too, and if the media asks, they can write their own version, Taehyung said calmly. We'll write ours by living it. The world outside HYBE continued to roar, but inside the building, a quieter revolution had already begun. In this fictional retelling, the media may have framed Taehyung's announcement as an earthquake, but the real shift was the tectonic one beneath the noise, the decision to stop treating idols like sentences drafted by committee. Taehyung spent the next morning not reading reports but rereading himself. He stood by the window of a lounge room, coffee in hand, watching Seoul wake up under a sky that never asked him to perform. Fans would have romanticized the moment if they saw it, caption overlays, cinematic music, poetic slow zooms. But the truth was simpler. It was a man realizing that identity is the only stage you must never hand over to an audience. The members gathered later that day for lunch. No executives present, no contracts on the table, no myth-making in the air. They spoke about trivial things at first, Jim's soreness, new song ideas, favorite winter meals, holiday plans, because healing often begins with ordinary conversation, not grand emotional summits. Then Jungkook tapped the table lightly, eyes soft but alert. So we're actually doing this honesty thing. We are, Jimin nodded. Messy honesty, Taehyung corrected with a small grin, not headline honesty. Yoongi raised a brow. Messy honesty is just therapy with better outfits. Hoseok laughed. We don't even have outfits today. Exactly, Taehyung said. That's how you know it's real. Jin leaned back comfortably. Good. I was tired of plot twists written by people who don't know our names properly. Namjoon smiled, stirring his noodles. The irony is they know your stage name, T, but not your real one. Taehyung nodded thoughtfully. Stage names trend, real names retain. And retention pays the bills, Jungkook said, smirking. Retention pays the future, Taehyung countered calmly. Virality pays the moment. The conversation drifted again, warm and human, like steam rising from soup in winter. And for the first time in this fictional arc, silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like punctuation for breathing, a comma, not a full stop. Later that week, HYBE released an official statement acknowledging Taehyung's temporary leave for creative recalibration, a fictional but symbolically honest explanation that neither denied his agency nor dramatized it. The media spun it anyway because spinning is their gravity. But the fans felt something different this time. They felt invited, not manipulated. Not because the story was explosive, but because it was survivable. In the retelling, Taehyung posted a message on Weverse, simple and direct, words shaped like someone finally speaking without echoing another voice. I needed space not to disappear but to return properly. Thank you for waiting without demanding a performance. The fandom didn't explode. It softened, because softness spread slower but wider. The industry kept analyzing him, but analysis had lost its ownership. Taehyung had reclaimed narrative custody, not by silencing critics, but by refusing to argue inside frames designed to shrink him into controversy. Months passed, music grew again, rehearsals regained rhythm, not because the fracture vanished, but because it healed into something wiser. The announcement that once stunned the fictional HYBE room had become a marker for maturity, not a crisis point, but a pivot. Taehyung eventually returned to the studio, not ceremonially but confidently. The members were already there, melodies looping, drafts open, not perfect, not polished, just true. Jungkook slid a chair beside him without a word, headphones half shared like old days. You writing or living at this time? Jungkook asked quietly. Both, Taehyung smiled. Good, Jungkook said, because we missed the messy parts too. The fictional arc closed not with a bang, but with alignment, brothers choosing to continue the story by being inside it, not merely trending through it. Because the loudest announcement Taehyung ever made wasn't spoken into microphones. It was spoken into the people who stayed when the headlines didn't know how to.